All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first part of our new webinar series, Clean Energy, Better Jobs, and Lower Costs for Our Families, hosted by Moms Clean Air Force, Eco Madres. In conversation today with Bob Keefe, the Executive Director of E2. My name is Kaya Stanford, and I serve as the Georgia Field Organizer for Moms Clean Air Force. For those of you who are new to Moms Clean Air Force, welcome. We are a community of 1.6 million moms, dads, and caregivers united to protect children from air pollution and climate change. Moms Clean Air Force is proud to have over 30,000 members here in the state of Georgia, my home state, and we're growing every day. Together, we're building powerful movement of families who are fighting for clean air and stable climate for the health of children and future generations. Today's conversation is especially important because supporting clean energy isn't only about protecting our planet and shielding people from the health impacts of pollution and climate change. It's also about creating good, high quality jobs, lowering energy costs for families, and strengthening local economies. At its core, it's about ensuring the health and well being of families and communities. With that said, I'm so honored to welcome our guest today, Bob Keefe, the Executive Director of Environmental Entrepreneurs, also known as E2, a national nonpartisan group of business leaders, investors, and others who advocate for smart policies that are good for the economy and the environment. Bob is also the author of Clean Economy Now and Climatenomics, two books that break down the economic impacts of climate policy in red and blue states alike. He is also a former national journalist with over 20 years of experience covering business, politics, and the environment. Bob will walk us through how clean energy is already transforming economies, starting right here in Georgia, as well as explain what's at stake if the key federal investments in clean energy are rolled back, including the consequences of the budget bill passed by Congress just last week. So, to anyone tuning in, we welcome you to ask questions in the chat on the platform that you're joining from. So, with that, we'll go ahead and get them at the end. So, I want to go ahead and welcome Bob. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, Kaya, it's so great to be with you, and thanks everybody for joining. The voice of Mom's Clean Air Force is just so important, and I just love I love the idea of alternative messengers on climate and clean energy. And there's no stronger or more powerful voice than moms. Just ask any of us who were sons. So thank you all for the fantastic work you're doing. And to give you just a little smidge more background about me and E2, it's so cool that we're looking first at Georgia, specifically at Georgia for this. My last job in journalism, as you mentioned, Kaya, was actually covering the White House and Congress for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for a number of years. And before that, I was a national reporter for the AJC and Cox newspapers around the country. So Georgia always has a strong place in my heart, as does the work that you all do. So thanks for letting me join you. So look, let's dive into this. A little more background about E2. We're a national organization of 10,000 business leaders who work or do business in just about every state and every sector of the economy. And we advocate for policies that are good for our economy and good for our environment. And I got to tell you, there's no policy that's been more important over the past few years than the Inflation Reduction Act, which we worked hard on along with Moms Clean Air Force and others to get passed 3 years ago next month, or signed into law 3 years ago next month. And that, as you probably know, just got eviscerated by the current Congress. But so we want to talk a little bit about that today, but I also want to talk and give you some reasons that you should be optimistic that we still have ways to make progress and will be making progress despite what we get out of Washington. But so let's take a look first at what happened. I think a lot of you know about the bill that was signed, the big bill. I'm not going to call it the big, beautiful bill. I'm going to call it the big bill that was signed into law by the president on the 4th of July. I'm not going to go through all of this, but you can take a look and go back into this later. But it basically kills tax credits for electric vehicles September 30th. That's going to make EVs about $7,500 more expensive for new EVs and $4,000 more expensive for used EVs. Residential solar is essentially tax credits for residential solar basically go away December 31st. What does that mean? That means that the cost of putting solar on your roof just got about 30% more expensive. Commercial solar wind credits are getting phased out. And thanks to an executive order that was signed literally last night by the president, it's going to be even harder to develop solar, wind, and battery projects around the country. The big bill also phases out credits for clean energy manufacturing projects, of which there's a whole heck of a lot of them in Georgia and other places throughout the Southeast that we can get into in a minute. And by the way, it also makes it a lot easier to keep us shackled to coal and oil and gas by reducing the cost for those companies to do that kind of energy development, reduces royalty rates for oil and gas on federal lands, and reclassifies coal as a quote unquote critical material so it can get tax credits there. So I think really the headline is what sums us up. This is going to really kill, or at least very much hamper clean power and spike our energy costs. How much? So this is data from CEBA, which is the Clean Energy Buyers Association, which predicts that the tax credits that just got killed are going to result in pretty noticeable increases in both residential and commercial electricity bills. And by the way, this is coming at a time when we need all the electricity we can get. Electricity demand is expected to increase by almost 50% by 2040. And the bad news is we just lost a big part of the electricity, the new electricity sources that are going on the grid today. So that's the bad news. What's the good news? I don't know how good it is, but it's hopeful at least. And let's start with the economics of all of this. Regardless of what happened in Washington last week, the fact of the matter is solar, wind, batteries is still the cheapest power that we can generate and the power that we can deploy the quickest at a time when, as you can see, we need a lot more of it because of everything from data centers and AI to everything that you and I plug into a wall these days. This is a chart that shows the cost of electricity by source without the tax credits. So a lot of these things, the price of onshore wind, for instance, was literally close to zero with the tax credits. Solar PV was close to $6 a megawatt hour with the tax credits, those that are going away. But still, again, these are the prices for a megawatt of hour of production from these sources without the tax credits that just went away. So take this all away. Onshore wind is still the cheapest power we can generate. Solar PV is the cheapest power we can generate. Combine that with batteries and storage, it's still very comparable to gas turbines and gas power plants. It's a hell of a lot cheaper than coal, and it's way, 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 as anybody in Georgia who's now paying for Plant Vogtle knows, it's way cheaper than nuclear. And the good news is we're still just getting started. As Kaya mentioned, I spent a lot of time as a journalist. A lot of that was as a technology reporter and editor around the country. And one thing I learned from that experience is that we should never discount the pace of technology or the importance of technology to making things cheaper, better, and faster. We've seen it already in solar and wind, and that's going to continue. This is a chart that shows, this is from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, that shows that solar and wind and batteries are just going to continue to get cheaper. Fossil fuels are going to continue to get more expensive. And that only makes sense when you think about where you get your fuel. You can pay to dig it up. You can pay to drill it. You can pay to burn it up, or you can get it free fuel from the sun, from the wind, and store it in batteries so you can keep the lights on overnight as well. So these are still very hopeful things, even without the tax credits, that clean energy is still the place that is growing the most. And indeed, it is growing the most. Let me see. I've got my charts mixed up here. This is the. I'm sorry, I'm one behind. This is where the majority of energy has come from last year and this year. 93% of this, folks, 93% of all new power added to the grid last year and this year, about 90% last year. This year is about 93, is expected to be about 93% by the end of the year, comes from wind, solar, and batteries. Why is that? It's not because utilities love polar bears or frankly care that much about the air that we breathe and the air that Mom's Clean Air Force helps protect. It's because it's cheap. It's because of those numbers I just told you. The cheapest power available, tax credits or not, is still solar, wind, and batteries. So that's hopeful. It's simple market dynamics, and it's simple economics, supply, demand, and pricing. And it's still in the favor of clean energy. Now, the other thing that has been a big part of what just got canceled are manufactured or delayed and essentially made tougher to access are clean energy tax credits for making the stuff that we need for solar solar power plants and wind farms and battery operations and electric vehicles. Since the passage of the IRA, my organization, E2, has been tracking what has been the result of that. And what we know is that there's more than 400 major projects that have been announced since August of 3 years ago, 132 billion, 133 billion almost of private sector investment by businesses into solar panel factories, into electric vehicle factories, into battery factories, wind turbine factories, and all of the suppliers that go into that stuff. 123,000 jobs announced in the past 3 years. When in the world have we seen something like that in America? 100 or 400 factories coming out of the ground to build the supplies that we need to shift to a cleaner economy. Not in my lifetime, and probably not in yours either. Unfortunately, that is now at risk. Georgia has been the biggest beneficiary of this. Georgia leads the country. You may have seen this or heard this before. 33 major projects in Georgia that have been announced since the IRA was passed. $13 billion in business investments in the state, 16,000 jobs. And there are places like these. QCells in Dalton, Georgia, which I visited as part of the book that I released a year ago. Hyundai, another place that I visited in Savannah, Georgia. SK Battery, and it's got a couple operations, including in, I think, Commerce and Cherokee in Georgia. But all of those major operations are creating thousands and thousands of jobs and giving us the tools we need to reduce our emissions. Remember, this is there's lots of concern. Are they doing manufacturing right? Is this really the right thing to do? But just remember that every kilowatt of energy that we can get from solar or wind or batteries is 1 kilowatt we don't have to burn up and dig up and burn fossil fuels that pollute our air and harm our health. Every time we can produce an electric vehicle that doesn't have to burn up gasoline to get down the road, it makes our air cleaner, it makes our climate better. So we need these tools to reach the goals that we have. And by the way, it's not just the direct investments. My organization did a study a couple of years ago that tracked all the projects announced in Georgia specifically in the first year of the IRA. And think about it. When you build a factory, those construction workers need a place to live. They need a place to eat. They're going to buy supplies from the local retailers. They're going to hire, obviously, local labor. All of that adds up. In the first year alone, the projects announced in Georgia were expected to add $14 billion to the state domestic product. That's just in the construction phase. After these plants are open, we're talking about 900 million plus every single year added to the state's economy. Now, unfortunately, a lot of these projects are at risk thanks to the legislation that was just passed. The other thing that my organization has been tracking since January is what has been the effect of all this talk about rolling back these policies. And what we know is that there's been more than $15 billion worth of projects that have already been canceled, 12,000 plus jobs canceled, including projects in Georgia and throughout the Southeast that businesses just simply decided we can't go forward if we don't have market certainty. And you're going to see a spike in cancellations, I guarantee it, now that this policy has been passed and this law has been passed. Companies are not going to be willing to bet their money, build big $5 billion factories and hire thousands of workers when they have the looming tax credit rollbacks and other negative business signals coming from the federal government. So that's the bad news. So what do we do about it? What do we do now? We saved what we could in the big ugly bill. It could have been a lot worse, thanks to our members who, again, were business people who were picking up the phone, calling their lawmakers, the people building some of these factories, the people in these jobs telling lawmakers, you're going to kill our industry, you're going to kill our jobs. We were able to save a lot. We were able to avoid a punitive tax on solar and wind, for instance. There's still a lot of issues around foreign entity of concern. It's called FEOC requirements for where you're going to get the supplies that go into the stuff you're building. But we made that a lot better. And we, frankly, raised awareness of what can happen. And we know what's going to happen because we've seen it in these cancellations, for instance, over the past 6 months. Now our job, and I say collectively our job at E2 for sure, hopefully with you all, is to make sure our elected officials make sure the public understands what is at risk here. We're going to continue to see those projects getting canceled. We're going to continue to see, frankly, businesses go out of business. Small solar installers are going to be hurt probably the worst. The folks that are doing residential in places like Georgia. I firmly believe that if we can continue to tell the story and show lawmakers what this bill is doing, we can figure out fixes in the months ahead and the years ahead. But we can only do that if we make sure that they understand what is happening. So that's really my goal. That's that's what E2 is going to be working on. And given Mom's Clean Air Force's tremendous voice in this, it's important for you all to think about how you can get involved as well. So, that's my story. Hopefully it sheds some light on where we are and where we're heading, and the reason for optimism. And I'd love to turn it over to Kai and hear from you all as well.
All right, thank you so much, Bob, for that presentation, especially the visual aids with the map itself. That map has been used by me personally so many times just to see what those investment looks like. So being able to put, I guess, a visual aid on what that looks like in the proximity it is to our communities and what that can mean for us economically, I think is impactful, because sometimes numbers on the screen don't do justice, seeing the distance of what that means and that money can impact us, especially seeing the $13 billion that was brought into the state, I think is impactful. So I want to go ahead and use my moderator privilege and ask a couple of questions that have been burning in my head, specifically when you were speaking, before I open it up to Q&A for anyone who may be watching the webinar right now. So I did see QCells in the photo of some of the projects that you put up while you were speaking. So I just want to ask a couple questions in regards to that project specifically, because QCells come from North America, and happening in Georgia was even more impactful for our local economy here. So can you break down what made that project possible? Just taking it back to IRA and what that specifically is and its impact, because I know that may be jargon for some people on the call, and how those federal investments from the Inflation Reduction Act under the previous administration helped bring jobs to Georgia. So I guess it's a twofold question. What impact did IRA have specifically, and what QCells did for the Georgia economy?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a fantastic example. And I've been down to QCells a couple of times now, and it's just a great story. QCells first factory was in Dalton, in Georgia, in the district of Marjorie Taylor Greene. Anybody from Georgia knows that Dalton is the carpet capital of the world, or it has been for a long time. And there's not a lot of other industry there. And I remember meeting a guy there. His name's Robert Howie. Robert works at QCells, but Robert grew up in Dalton. His mama worked in carpet. His daddy worked in carpet. His uncle worked in carpet. Robert didn't want to work in carpet, but he didn't have a whole lot of choices. So Robert joined the Navy. He served in the Navy for a couple of years. He learned electronics. He missed home. He came back to Georgia wondering what the heck he was going to do. And lo and behold, this giant solar panel factory is being built in his backyard. And he's now really just such a great advocate for QCells and for the solar industry in general. It's really been fun to see. And this is what it looks like on the ground. But to get to your point, QCells had been looking at expanding in the United States for a while. It's a Korean company. And when the IRA happened, and I think QCells will tell you the same story, it just basically turbocharged their plans. They've opened, I think, 2 other factories in that area since then. And the reason it did that is, number one, yes, there's the manufacturing tax credit, which certainly helps because it reduced the cost of building a factory like that. It's basically an investment in economic development in that region. And if you talk to the head of economic development there, which we have, he says, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And it's really reinvigorating this community and bringing new opportunities that we just never expected. But that's part of of how the IRA worked. The other part was what just got killed, which is the 30% credit for installing this stuff on your roof, or the tax credits for building utility scale solar using panels from a place like QCell. So you have the push, if you will, with the tax credits to build these factories, and you have the pull of the demand, consumer demand, to get it out there. And the net is we create a lot of jobs with a relatively small investment in the scheme of things. We create a lot of jobs. We bring new opportunities to a place like Dalton. We make energy cheaper for all of us, because remember what I said, solar, wind, batteries is the cheapest power available. And we produce this stuff in America, which is important because, right now, 90% of the solar panels that are built in the world come from China or a couple other countries. About 90% of the batteries built come from China or a couple of countries. America invented this stuff, but frankly, we didn't have a dog in the hunt. Once this stuff goes on the global marketplace, we had nothing. But guess what? Since the IRA, we've seen more than 60 solar panel factories being built, including QCells, which, by the way, is the biggest solar panel factory in the Western Hemisphere. We've seen about 50 battery factories being built, including those like SK and others in Georgia. we've seen more than 140 EV-related factories being announced and built around the country, including Hyundai down in Savannah, which is the biggest auto factory we've seen in this country in a very long time as well.
Thank you. That was helpful in understanding. Putting faces, well, not faces. I took my own creative option to try to make his face in the whole family story, but actually understanding how that affects actual people with names and with backgrounds who are Georgians is, I think, really important to be able to understand the story, but also this is real life for a lot of people. So thank you for that explanation. I think it was helpful. So I have another question, and it has to do with being a parent. I know that you're a parent. A lot of the people in our organization are parents or caregivers. So I know that you talked about the energy costs that will probably skyrocket because of that bill. So I know that you put numbers behind it, but like, what can we do as parents to plan for these changes?
Right. Well, thank you very much for that. And I bet a lot of people on this call will say what I'm about to say, which is when people ask me what I do, I tell them it's for three simple reasons. Delaney, Grace, and Carly. Those are my three daughters. And they're probably older than most of you have daughters on this call right now. They're all in their 20s now. And that's a whole thing. But we've got to leave this world in a better place for them. And that's why I do the work that we do. And if we can expand clean energy through policy, et cetera, again, that means we're burning less fossil fuels. We're polluting the air less. We're making a cleaner environment, and we're creating economic opportunities in this country that frankly didn't exist 20 years ago. So all of those things figure into my thinking about all of this. It's always about family, but it's not just my family; it's all of our families. And if we care about our families and our future, which I know everybody on this call does, and I think everybody in the country does, we ought to be moving toward this, not away from it.
Yeah. That's true. So my next question kind of goes into your point there. And I know that you talk about it a lot from a policy standpoint because of who you are, as well as from a business standpoint because of the people in you. So the question I have in terms of, with knowing mostly for everyone on this call, this being a family conversation more so than anything else, how do we have these conversations with people in our community in a way that it'll resonate with them on a community, on a health impact standpoint? We can throw numbers at them all we want, right? But we want to connect to their ethos. So what's the best way for us to communicate these issues with people in our community?
Yeah, well, obviously a part of that is cutting through the miscommunication, right? I mean, if you hear certain people in the U.S. Capitol or at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, aka the White House, this is the green new scam. Oh yeah, this crazy green stuff that doesn't work, right? What does the green new scam look like? It looks like 4,000 jobs at QCells. It looks like 6,000 jobs, I believe, at Hyundai. It looks like new opportunities for people like Robert Howie and others that I mentioned, Georgians, our neighbors, your neighbors. It means cleaner air for our children. It means making America competitive again. You know, the thing I love about Mom's Clean Air Force, and the thing I love about E2 is we're not, tree hugging environmental policy wonks from San Francisco or New York. Not that I don't love my colleagues tree hugging environmental policy wonks from San Francisco or New York, but you're working moms with families in Georgia and other states. In my case, we're business people. My members are business people who are trying to not only make a living, but make the world a little bit better. Those bring perspectives to lawmakers, for instance, that they're not going to hear from Frankly, career environmentalists or policy wonks from some big environmental NGO. These are real stories. And all of us now have stories about either the economic benefits we've seen or the economic losses that we've seen from climate change. We all know somebody who's lost a house now we've all know somebody who's lost a house to a fire or a flood or a hurricane. We come from communities that have been impacted by the lack of action on climate. We have a simple solution now. The technology behind clean energy has caught up with the problem. We just need to make sure this problem is fixed with the technology that we now have.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I know that technology is always a large conversation, and I don't think I understand how they intermingle so much. So that was the last question that I had. So I do want to take the moment to look through the comment section just to see what questions some of our audience members have. Let's see. Okay. This question is from Allie. Are there any state tax incentives we should, that's the question. Are there any state tax incentives? And then should we try to get these tax credits at the federal level again or in another few years?
That's a great question. So to my point earlier that I was trying to make, and probably didn't do a very good job at it, but while these policies writ large have been essentially rolled back and stopped in their tracks, I think there's an opportunity to bring some of them back at least a smaller level. The tax credits for solar and wind have been around for a while, not as long as tax credits for oil and gas, by a century or so. But typically, anybody in the solar business will tell you it's a solar coaster, right? Because these credits would come into play for solar development, but they'd last a year, maybe 2 years. Sometimes, if we were lucky, 3 years. And if you think about the cost and the time it takes to build a power plant from solar panels, it can take 2 or 3 years, sometimes longer. In the past, anyway, we can do a lot quicker now. But so it's always been this up and down thing with these clean energy tax credits. This eviscerates it basically, as you can see at the end of this year. But if we can show, and I know we can, unfortunately, we can show that we're going to lose jobs. We're going to lose investments like the ones we've been talking about. We're going to lose in the competitive fight against China and other countries. As those things become more publicly known, as we talk about it, as moms talk about it, as businesses talk about it, lawmakers are going to be under a lot of pressure to fix this. So we think that there's some opportunities going forward where we can fix some of this stuff and maybe make it more palatable to develop more clean energy in the years ahead. And as we continue to raise public awareness about this, and as, again, the prices continue to go down for clean energy and up for everything else, and demand continues to skyrocket, we have some opportunities. There's going to be some sense that people come to of what just happened. Unfortunately, it's going to be on the backs of people who are going to lose their jobs and communities that are going to lose opportunities. But we can't let that just float by the wayside and ignore it. We've got to make sure that lawmakers understand what's happening. Electricity prices going up, and then we demand fixes to it. And at the state level, by the way, to get to the other part of the country question, yes, there are a lot of places in the country where state policies can come into play to continue to support this and to expand clean energy. In Georgia, it's tricky because of Georgia Power, quite honestly. But you've also got a Republican governor, who says he wants to be the EV mobility capital of the world. And he just might do that. It just might actually be the case. But I believe we need to lean into that. Governor Kemp supports a lot of this stuff. He doesn't say it publicly because it would buck the guy in charge in Washington. But he understands it because Georgia, for instance, is just such a business state. And the economy is so important in any discussion around politics there. And he realizes the jobs, the billions in investments that are coming to that state around electric vehicles already.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is put your mouth where your money is and your money where your mouth is to see.
There you go.
I love that.
Yep.
So another question that we have is, what kind of advocacy was E2 and their business community focusing on these past few weeks? I think I have an idea, but here your thoughts.
So, again, we've been around for 25 years. The last 3 or 4, we've been probably 80% of what we have been focused on is, number one, getting the Inflation Reduction Act and the clean energy provisions of that passed. And then in the past few weeks, and really the past few months, at least 6+ months, we've been focusing on protecting those provisions. And again, we certainly didn't. There's no mistake about it. This was a huge step backward, not for E2, but for the country, for our environment, for our economy. And it's going to take a lot to get back to where we are, where we were. But we're going to keep fighting, and we're going to make incremental gains, I know, at the federal level. And in the meantime, we're also going to focus on the states and do what we can in the states.
Love that. Keep fighting. That's what all of us are trying to do. So another question that we have, it reads, you mentioned that by 2040, energy demand will increase by 47%. What role do data centers and AI play in that demand? Hot topic there. And do you think we'll be able to meet it?
Humongous. AI and data centers is driving the majority of the growth. But it's, quite frankly, it's also factories like QCells and Hyundai and others that are, and the manufacturing industry generally, that's driving the growth in electricity demand. But absolutely, data centers, AI, I'm trying to limit myself from using Alexa and Google and certainly ChatGPT, because every time I do, I think about, man, that's a little energy that somebody doesn't have to turn their light on, maybe, right? So it definitely plays a huge role. One of the things that we're doing at E2, we got our start actually in Silicon Valley. Our founders were Silicon Valley people who started standing up and making the business case for what then were the first ever clean greenhouse gas clean vehicle standards, the California Clean Car Standards, 25 years ago. But our roots are in tech and in Silicon Valley. So one of the things that we're working on starting right now is kind of a coalition of tech for innovation and energy, where we can start to bring big tech voices together to start figuring out how to address these data center demands through efficiency, through better and cleaner energy, but also get them engaged with our advocacy, again, for clean energy at both the federal and the state level, but also in reinvigorating innovation in this country, which, like a lot of things, have taken a huge hit over the past 6 months.
And then one last question before we wrap it up. So the question reads, Bob, from where you stand, do you feel hopeful? Now that this bill is passed, what will your policy goals with E2 look like moving forward?
I absolutely am hopeful. And I'm hopeful for those reasons I said. Again, clean energy is still the cheapest, quickest to deploy power that we can produce. And as I mentioned, I spent a lot of years as a journalist, and a lot of that as a tech journalist. And I know how quickly and how decisively economic transitions can happen. And I guarantee we are in a big one right now. And regardless of what the Trump administration and Congress just did, that trajectory is still going. It's not going as fast as we needed to go. There's definitely going to be some more bumps in the road. But, when I was a technology reporter, I remember going to cover Apple, for instance, and Steve Jobs came out on a stage with a little thing that said, someday you're going to have 100 songs in your pocket. And then a couple of years later, and I looked around, I was like, what the heck do I need that for? I got a great CD collection. A couple of years later, he came out and said, this is a new phone and you'll be able to take pictures with it. And I'm like, what the heck? I got a great camera. Why do I need that? Look at how quickly that technology has changed. The same thing is happening now in energy. Remember how we got started in this country? We got started in energy by killing whales and burning up their blubber to keep our lights on. Then we started digging up coal. Then we started drilling for oil and gas. We still do some of those things. Fortunately, we don't kill whales anymore, but we still do some of those things. But as you saw from those charts, 90% of all power put on the grid last year and this year comes from solar, wind, and batteries. The technology is here. These aren't Jimmy Carter's solar panels anymore. These aren't, General Motors' first electric vehicle anymore. The technology has caught up with the problem. And as a result, prices are declining, and that only means that we'll deploy more of this. The other thing I'm hopeful about is when you look at that map and saw where all those projects are. Republicans just eviscerated these clean energy tax credits, but you have to remember that 80% of those business investments are in Republican congressional districts. This isn't something for California hippies or New York tree huggers anymore. This is happening in Georgia. It's happening in South Carolina. It's happening in Tennessee. It's happening primarily in red states. And if we can get past the politics, we realize that this is about jobs, economic growth, opportunities, all things that are important to every single state, from Governor Kemp to the House of Representatives and the members from Georgia. Those are things that are important. They voted the way they did for a lot of reasons. It's not because they hate jobs, economic growth, or opportunities for their constituents. And we're going to hold them accountable for that. And we're going to, they're not going to be able to avoid the problems that this bill has created. And we're going to keep pressuring on them because it's their neighbors being affected now, not me in California or somebody in New York.
Yeah. I think that is a good stopping point, Bob. Thank you so much for your insight and being willing to answer the questions today. I think clearly that clean energy is an economic issue as much as it is a health and an environmental issue, to your point that you
Absolutely.
just made. Yeah. So it is so helpful to understand how much the growth and potential there is in cleaner energy, and that we should be fighting for it collectively, as you just said, it's past the politics, right? So thank you all who are watching right now from home. Thank you for attending the webinar. And as we close, there will be 2 QR codes, that fast, that'll pop up on the screen, as well as links to be in the comment section. So the first one is going to be a link to sign up for the second session, which Bob will be at as well. So if you enjoyed this conversation and want to dive deeper on what that looks like in other states, please feel free to pre-register and share it with other people who will enjoy this conversation as well. And then the second one is going to be a link to take action today. So as we speak now, our Moms Clean Air Force members are testifying before the EPA Environmental Protection Agency to oppose the proposal to roll back the carbon rule for fossil power plants. So going directly into the conversation that we're having today. The public comment period will last until August, so please reach out to us, personally in Georgia, if you're interested in submitting your testimony in writing. So today you'll be able to sign and your name to an ongoing petition that we're doing to tell the EPA hands off of climate pollution limits to power plants. So again, thank you so much for joining in this conversation. Thank you so much to Bob for giving your time and your insight. And we hope to see you at the next iteration of this series when we talk about another state. So again, be sure to register. Be sure to use the link that will be dropped in the comment section. And we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, everybody.